Welcome to Windows on the World, bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories. On tonight's show. Okay, so Max Bliss, you've just been to the Climategate Conference 2014 in Berlin, and you've got some very interesting news for us. You've talked about this on another radio show, but let's just sum up really what it was about and what you think you achieved.
Well, it was a very interesting conference. It was over 4 days in Berlin, and it was well attended by hundreds of different transdisciplinary academics. There were many of the world's leading climate scientists there, and it felt like over this 4-day period we were attending lots of different presentations and different workshops and different types of presentations in order to update all the conference attendees. And I feel that it was to inform all these various different academics from different disciplines to the latest understanding of what's happening with global warming, with the anthropogenic global warming situation, and with the solutions. This was the conference was really about climate engineering. So we're talking about different solutions to the so-called problem of anthropogenic global warming. And it was very interesting. You could participate in different ways. Sometimes there were games, sometimes you could sit in on a panel, like I sat in on one of the panel discussions, and you could interact, and there was lots of opportunities for discussions and personal conversations with various different people. And ultimately I felt that it was all moving towards a particular direction where they were looking to get all the attendees to agree to sign a declaration called the Berlin Declaration. And this declaration was to ensure that everyone agreed to create a public license for the governance to regulate geoengineering, their concern being that very rich individuals or rogue nations could begin climate engineering without any oversight. So they were looking for the opportunity to get a public agreement that this would not have been binding in any legal fashion, but this would have been a big step towards being able to do this because of a group of people agreeing to this. And of course, there was a handful of activists there. I think there were 6 of us in total, and there were hundreds of these various different academics. And through the course of the 4 days, we did our best to ask various pertinent questions and raise important points, and to verify those with the necessary quoted information that was accurate. And we were able to create a change in people's attitudes. We were able to create enough dissent with these transdisciplinary participants that when it came to the end of the conference, they rejected this Berlin Declaration. And so I view that as a fantastic success. And I know that we made a massive impact in this conference because there were many of these scientists coming up and asking us questions and wanting to share their ideas, and we made lots of contacts, and it was just a tremendous experience to be able to meet these people and discuss different issues eyeball to eyeball, and contest the establishment's line, which I believe to be fraudulent. I don't believe that there's an anthropogenic global warming problem. We did suggest that there may be a covert climate engineering program already in place, which we believe has been decades in the development. And of course that met with denial, but at the same time they said, well, we're unaware of what the military might be doing. So that they were already paving their way to try and be cautious in case our persistence continues on and they are left exposed, as we uncover the fact that there's obviously a covert climate engineering program in place, and they have been regulating cloud evolution, they have been spraying ozone depleting chemicals to strategically target different regions. They have actually been developing systems of wide-scale weather modification to be used strategically for many decades on a huge scale as well, with hundreds of nations participating. So I think that the establishment, they're becoming aware that our efforts are starting to gain traction, and that we're starting to form decent resistance. And our ally is the truth, because that's what we're searching for: reliable, verifiable information that's solid, and it's becoming more difficult for them.
Yes, I mean, the major point here is that you wouldn't have been there if this wasn't happening, and you weren't concerned about it, because this is really the culmination of years of research and, in a way, years of frustration, because I've seen your videos when you're looking up at the sky and what can we do about this? Because this has been going on now. We know it's been going on to a great and greater extent since 2010. I saw a massive escalation from then on. But this is really a big breakthrough, isn't it?
Well, it was certainly a victory to make all the contacts and to see people reject this Berlin Declaration. Obviously I do view it as a success, and it was a great confidence boost, because I realised that we can actually meet these people and confront them with the truth, or raise our issues in a legitimate fashion that does confront their consensus that they're trying to establish. I think their consensus is quite tenuous. It's just reinforced by repetition and the weight of the media and the governments who are actively promoting this fraudulent claim, because unfortunately this whole agenda, this global warming agenda and climate engineering solutions, this is really manoeuvring society towards a one world globalized system. This is like a totalitarian socialist system akin to communism. And the reason they're able to get this system emerging is because of this so-called threat to the planet, which they're saying is a global threat, and therefore there need to be global solutions. And this is, people really need to understand that the governments want a one world government system.
I think that's very important, Max, the words global governance and consensus, because consensus doesn't mean that what's being put across to the public is the truth. It just means that we have to agree on it.
Yes, that's a very good fact, and they have a play on words. They talk about man-made climate change, they talk about, yes, we're 95% there's climate change. Of course, there's climate change. Climate has always changed, and it always will change. So they can say that, and they can state that with confidence, because that's true. And in some degree, they can say there's man-made global warming. The question is, how dangerous is it? How much is it? And how much of that man-made global warming is by deliberate means rather than inadvertent means? And it's the more and more we research this, the more and more we look into it, we realise that this is not a scientific agenda. This is a political agenda.
Oh, absolutely. And we all know about Al Gore's film and the the ridiculous Hollywoodization and it wasn't even allowed to be shown in schools, allegedly.
They've withdrawn it, haven't
without the changes, but they still do it. Now, there are actually people in school right now in the UK doing GCSEs on climate change. Now, I wonder if those kids do any real Google searches and find out alternative views on it, because it's this thing of consensus seems to be running through everything. We've just got trained change agents everywhere. Now, it's very interesting what you brought up about climate change, and they're really depending on the polar ice caps melting. This is really a big part of their propaganda. And talking to Michael J. Murphy is very interesting, because we got onto this point that they're actually trying to melt them just so that they can say that their agenda is working and they were right in the first place. That's how ridiculous it is.
Yes, I'd agree. I mean, there's an awful lot of documentation, historical documentation, referring to the agenda to deliberately melt the Arctic region. And this was actively investigated and reported upon right up to the mid-60s publicly by organisations like the National Science Foundation of America, which is a really major organisation. So it's as official from the establishment as you can get. So they were openly talking about it for many decades. You even had people like Julian Huxley from the UNESCO, from the United Nations, suggesting they could use a series of nuclear detonations to destroy the ice. There are so many different examples we can look to verify this establishment's agenda to deliberately melt the Arctic. But it seemed to take a shift towards the 60s, as at the same time, coincidentally, we started to see the development of the green agenda, of the green movement, of the environmental movement in tandem, a sudden shift from openly wanting to warm the climate to saying, oh, the climate's actually now a problem by warming. So there was some sort of political shift in their agenda at that point. But it's quite clear that the technology has been developed for many, many decades. It's been implemented as best as we can detect simply from things like the massive ozone holes that develop in strategic locations. As one method, we know that there's been over 135 nuclear detonations in the Arctic region. There's also quite a large number of technology referred to as ionospheric heaters. These are huge antenna arrays that send energy up to the ionosphere, and they begin to interact and control the ionosphere and the huge amounts of energy up there, and they can redirect the jet streams, bring warm air into the Arctic region in an effort to try and melt the Arctic region, and that may cause cold air from the Arctic to blast down to different areas as the warm air is drawn up there by a relocated jet stream. So there are different technologies that they're employing. But I think that Mother Nature is not so easy to tame. And if we were to look, for example, there's a website called, I can read it out, it's nsidc.org/Arctic Sea Ice News / and you find that the Arctic is back to normal. It's completely, the ice cap is completely as it should be. There's no depletion to the sea ice, and amazingly, if we look to the Antarctic, it's huge. It's making record. It's been expanding for the last 20 years. Breaking all the records, but of course the records they're almost insignificant, since they've only had records since the 50s of the amount of sea ice. So it's, on the scale of climate and the way climate changes, that's not very accurate, really. It's a very, very tiny proportion of comparison. And if we consider that during the medieval warm period, we had over 400 years where up to 6,000 Vikings were living in Greenland.
Yes, but
At
Max, we now know that the medieval warm period did not exist because it was written out of history by the University of East Anglia, I believe.
Well, that would be linked to the UK Climate Research, who have been caught out on a couple of occasions with thousands of emails in the Climategate scandal. So, their reputation is in tatters, but they've got the full weight of the government support and of the media behind them, so they can continue with they can ignore the Climategate scandals. The Climategate scandals basically where different climate scientists were saying, what are we going to do because there's been no global warming since 1997. They were altering the data, skewing the data to fit the desired models to maintain the climate alarm. So, we've got these institutions that are supposedly instructing the world that we have this global dire meltdown, but it's not actually legitimate, because otherwise they wouldn't have to skew the data. They wouldn't have to homogenize data. They wouldn't have to lie.
Well, the thing is with the climate change agenda is let's see, a slightly apart from the geoengineering program, in the respect that the climate change agenda is basically the whole driving force behind all this taxation, the theft of property, and Agenda 21. So really the geoengineering is being done on the back of this, which is another lie. So we've got a lie that started out in the 60s, really. We've covered this on the show. We did a show called The Smart Green Genocide, of how all this started out in the 60s and was promoted. And of course, all the documents, you've read every single one of them, which proposes that we find a new enemy. And it's actually us, unfortunately. So I think the really horrific thing about this is that on the back of this completely fraudulent agenda, which is really about power and control, taking over people's assets and their lives and their minds, we've also got this huge program of global poisoning going on.
Well, the thing is, they're creating catastrophe. They are the ones responsible for problems on this planet. It's an interesting one, isn't it? That they are the ones who control industry. They're the ones that regulate industry, and the toxins that are going into the oceans, that are being sprayed continuously with food production. They are the ones responsible for that, and so the negative impacts on our climate that everyday people are being blamed for, really and truly are squarely at the feet of the globalists, of these sort of criminal elites at the top of their game, the ones that control all the corporations. They are the ones that have created all the toxins that are being polluting our planet. Yet we are being asked to take the blame and to alter the way we live, when they are the ones that have created the problems. The typical Hegelian dialect, where they create the problem, then there's a reaction, and then they offer the solutions, and that's the place they wanted to be at before they created the problems. We're just being manipulated.
That's absolutely right. And so you've had quite a few run-ins with these people, Ian Hume and David Keith, over the years, and apparently it was whispered around this conference, is Max Bliss here?
Yeah. They definitely, I know they definitely know of me, to the point when if I see Ken Caldera, he'll literally, his face will turn white, and he'll try to get out of a room to avoid speaking with me, which is disappointing, actually, because I've only ever been cordial and decent with him. I haven't been offensive or anything. It's just that I'll do my best to communicate and speak the truth, and I think that frightens them, basically.
Well, it does seem to. I came to that debate at the Oxford Union with you. In a way, it's quite pantomime. You've got these kind of two factions, and they play good cop, bad cop with their own little agenda going on up there.
For sure. They have their own plants in the audience that ask questions and so on. It's completely staged. And if you remember, actually, at that Oxford presentation, I managed to catch the mediator out when I asked him that he'd written on his blog that they have, in fact, been geoengineering for many years. And their reaction to that was just sheer panic.
Yes, but it was only in an experimental stage, and I don't think that's really relevant to what we're talking about here today, Max. It's the Delphi technique, and we've covered that on the show as well, and the way these things are run by consensus, and it's always consensus, it's a con. They're trying to gain the upper ground, basically by lying, and I think that the thing is that you've exposed, you've actually gone to these people, and what is quite troubling is how uninformed they are, and how little they seem to want to take any responsibility for what's going on, because they clearly do know what's going on.
I would agree with you. That's absolutely correct. You know, it was very interesting. There were two particular lines of trying to wriggle out of responsibility that I found repeating amongst all the various different climate scientists. First of all, they would say they don't know what's happening with the military side of things, which I don't believe that they would have no knowledge of it, because half of them are working with them. And the second thing was that they kept repeating was, we're just scientists, we don't make decisions. That's up to the politicians. So they're basically saying, don't point fingers at us, we just do our jobs, we just advise the politicians. The buck stops with the politicians, they are the ones that make the decisions, which of course we know is not true anyway, because those decisions have already been decided long before the agenda was really going. You know, it's the way it works is they realise where they want to be, and they manipulate it so they arrive there.
That's right. I mean, when we talk about collective consensus, that's what collective consensus really is about. No individual responsibility, and they can say, "Oh well, it's the politicians who make the decisions." Well, we know very well that Nick Clegg and David Cameron do not run this country, or are totally uninformed about what's going on. That's a fact. We know that. We can see that by what's being played out. So the fact that these people call themselves scientists and are put up there with this consensus reality that we've been pushed into, and that's been pushed through the education system, and to take away pretty much all of our rights, then it's pretty scary, because it's like, as we've just reiterated in a way, that when you confront these people, they're pretty sheepish, and they're very weak-minded people, really, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of feel that all the while these people go around on tour all the time. It's the same core scientists going around constantly on tour all around the world, attending many conferences, sometimes many times a month. And I feel that they feel protected because they're being pushed to do this. They're being funded. They've got financial interests in different new technologies. Like, for example, Professor David Keith stands to make billions because he's got a company that's developing carbon removal technology. Much the same, like Al Gore will become one of the richest men in the world if everyone subscribed to his global warming fear campaign. But these scientists, especially the core group, they're really pushed. They're funded by Bill Gates, for example, and they have a lot of support from the establishment. So they kind of they've been picked, they've been groomed. They're getting a big ego rush. They're treated like stars. They're on television. They go out on the stage. They've got all the lesser academics giving them accolades and lots of respect. And basically, these people are ego-driven.
Yeah, they've also, if they did have any conscience in the first place, it's been wiped out by this kind of slippers under the table, blasé attitude they have. Because that's one thing I noticed at that thing we went to, is they kind of give you a little bit of their time at the end. It's very blasé. it's very similar to any meeting that you'd go to at a public, where there's so-called public servants, say at your local town hall. You're getting this kind of programmed response from them. They're almost bored by the proceedings, and they don't really want to listen to you.
No, they're very snobbish, and they think you've got nothing to contribute. They don't take anyone else seriously. You know, it's they are snobs. They're wrapped in hubris. They're incredibly proud of themselves. They think they're elitists, and in some ways they are, because they've been put on this pedestal and they're being pushed by the establishment. So I can understand why they might have this illusion or delusion of their grandeur. You know, it's completely understandable. They're completely pushed. But the truth is that these people, when push comes to the shove, they are guilty of playing a significant role in potentially the enslavement of this planet. Because that's what Agenda 21, which is known as Sustainable Development, that's what that plan is about. It's not to save the planet, it's to slave the planet. And these people, these climate scientists that are going around on this tour, this global tour, perpetual global tour, which I would imagine will culminate in the Paris 2015 COP conference, the climate change of parties, climate of parties, in 2015, this year, December. The idea is that they will manage to achieve a consensus amongst nations to agree to a United Nations climate treaty, a legally binding treaty that will be the foundation of a massive globalization of a climate action plan. And that these climate action plans will basically mean a shift towards a carbon neutral economy, which means a massive change in technologies, huge amounts of new regulation that will just change the way we live, that will make the more recent silly little Brussels thing they did, where you're not allowed to have powerful vacuum cleaners anymore. That will be the absolute tip of the iceberg. That's going to be nothing compared to what they plan to bring in to alter the society, to alter human behaviour. They plan to literally police the amount of electricity you use in your own private home. You know, they with smart meters and a smart grid, they're going to monitor even down eventually to what food you have in the fridge. And if you're eating unhealthy food, that will affect your health insurance. You know, they want total monitoring, a really serious police state. And these climate scientists, if they're unaware of what's going on, they need to know, because this is what they're helping bring in.
Well, that's right. They're not able to see the bigger picture, or if they are able to see the bigger picture, then they really are out of their minds, because this Agenda 21, we've covered it so much on the show, and it's such a big subject, but the smart meters are being resisted by people like Deborah Tavares in California, and they're coming here. We now have a thing called an energy performance certificate for every house in this country, which everyone thinks, well, what's all that about? It's a load of nonsense. If you want to sell your house, these state agents say, oh, you have to have this, you have to pay 90 quid for it or whatever, and it takes
Same in France, by the way.
Yes, and it takes 5 minutes. However, when all this regulation really kicks in, people are going to have liens put on their property, have their property stolen, because, of course, under Agenda 21, we're not allowed to have property. But getting back to, because we could really go into one with this one, but getting back to the conference, can you just give us a few of the highlights of it for you and points that you'd like to make?
Well, one of the areas that that I was quite surprised at, as you did touch on, was the fact that many of the I would say that there was a core group of these regular scientists that are always going around on tour, and then basically there was a large proportion of transdisciplinary academics from different fields. And I would say that the large majority of these people were straight, decent, hardworking people, and that they're unaware of the bigger picture, and they were basically getting indoctrinated or updated with the latest amount of information. And I really did manage to connect with a lot of these people, and you know, it was a very, very good experience. But some of the interesting things were when I first wanted to go to this conference, I found out about it very late in the day, and I managed to contact the person in charge of the steering committee for the conference, the guy who's literally coordinating this whole conference, and it was a huge conference. So,
how many people were there, Max? Give us a rough idea.
I think it was over 300 academics, and there were literally just 6 activists. And we really did. I think nobody realised there were going to be members of the public there, and it was quite expensive. It was €300 to attend, and obviously we had to pay for accommodation and transport. I had to drive. It was a 5,000 kilometre round trip for me to get there in my whole van. So it was quite a trip. It's not something you could just say, oh yeah, all right, I'll do it, I'll see you at the weekend. It was a bit of a venture for us to go there. But when I talked to this particular a man from the steering committee, his name was Dr. Stefan Schaefer, and I was trying to impress on him that I wanted the opportunity to speak at the conference, and he was considering it, but it was late in the day because it had really been organised by that stage. And I was trying to sort of convey to him that I had been doing my research, and I said to him, I guess you already understand about that there are 500 new climate laws for 2015. And there was a pause. And he said, actually, no, I didn't know there were 500 new climate laws for 2015. And, I was really, really surprised.
That's a very good point you've just brought up there, Max, because I can say that this is my experience too, is that you do some research and you go into these public forums and you tell them what is on the public record and they actually don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think they kind of, the way I describe these people is the vast majority of them are good, sort of hard-working people, but they don't have any peripheral vision. They can't see apart from what they're focusing on. That's it. They can't see anything else. They just, they're working hard in their particular area. So that gives them quite a disadvantage, and obviously it's good for the establishment because it's much easier to manipulate these people, and because they're just working hard in one particular area, they don't know what's going on elsewhere. They're compartmentalised basically. So that was revealing, and I mentioned that particular fact about the 500 climate laws to various different people in conversation. I even had some of them looking them up on the internet, because everybody was connected to the internet there with their laptops and everything, and instantly looking up and verifying the fact that that's true. Wow, they didn't realise, and it was news to them, because some of these people were quite concerned that this was moving forward quite quickly. As far as because it was a transdisciplinary conference, so that was quite encouraging that we were able to share that type of information with them, let alone the historical references of various different programs that have been in development. Like in 1965, there's like an extensive report into how to control the weather and climate by the US military back in the 60s. Later in the 70s, there's a similar one. And, in 1996 even, there was a symposium on owning the weather in 2025.
Yeah.
So a lot of these people did not realise the timeline and the development and the funding and the extent of actually a global weather modification program. I even said to some of them, President JFK had said in 1961, on the 25th of September, the United Nations Assembly, that all nations would work together to accurately predict the weather and eventually control the weather. That's back in 61. Now, and things have moved on a long way since 1961. Technology certainly improved, and their understanding of what they're doing with the environment has certainly improved. So I feel that when you start to see the longevity of the development of controlling the weather and climate, it becomes a lot easier to realise that there's very likely a covert climate engineering program already in place, creating extremes of weather. And of course, you've got the dutiful media hyping up anything that happens, which is incredible, really, because in the past, when things happened before in the 19th century or 20th century early on, it's just a storm. Now it's because of global warming that storm happened.
Well, we do have our own, state brainwashing corporation here called the BBC, and they've bought this hook, line and sinker and promote it relentlessly. But what you said there was very interesting. Transdisciplinarity. He used this word. Yeah. And it says
there were
beyond
engineers, there were lawyers, there were different people that would be involved with solar radiation management or with climate action plans.
It says here, Max, it's very interesting that they said beyond interdisciplinary action. Now we see this is the way that all this consensus stuff is brought forward to lead beyond authority. So even as a side issue, you can go to this a policing academy, basically, and it's a private company here, and they state that they are working with stakeholders. Now it's very interesting because in the documentation that you had there, it says beyond interdisciplinary action between researchers to incorporate stakeholders. Now this is happening through the whole of Agenda 21. It's about corporations coming in, stakeholders. Now
public partnerships
in your local area. This is how our Agenda 21 is being played out through these stakeholders who are just corporations who are coming in, and it's always the same language, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Once you become familiar with the various different buzzwords that they use, you do realise that there's an agenda playing out. That they use the same techniques all the time. And if I can just go back to the conference for a moment, one of the things that alarmed me, that was confirming my own research, that they actually talked about how they realised democracy was an obstacle for them to enable their climate engineering programs, because there are too many risks involved with an overt climate engineering program. I mean, obviously, we realise there are risks with a covert climate engineering program because we're seeing the destruction, the extreme weathers whilst they've been developing this technology. A lot of extreme weather that is completely unheard of. There's a very strong likelihood. There's been evidence in the past that extreme storms were, in actual fact, part of the development of weather modification technology. So it's hard to. There are some evidence that emerges that confirms that the governments were using weather technology. It created a terrible storm, killed people. Like, for example, in Lynmouth in Devon in 1952, Operation Cumulus, which was nicknamed by the flight crew Operation Witch Doctor. They were cloud seeding, creating rain. And they literally created a huge storm that washed away a village and killed 35 people. But they denied it for over 50 years.
We covered that on that very first show that you were on, Max, at the People's Voice, when you came over, which is over a year ago now. So
yes, time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah. Now I think this is quite a development, though. So, are you happy with what you've been doing? Because I know that it's been incredibly frustrating at times, because trying to get this anywhere has been very, very difficult. So just in summing up, just tell us what you think you achieved at this and what you're going to be doing next.
Well, there's no doubt about it that attending the conference was a turning point. It was a great confidence boost, realising that we can communicate with these people, can meet these people on their level, we can communicate with them, we can share compromising information that they may not be aware of. So that was a real confidence boost. So I realise now that our way to move forward is to continue to confront these people eyeball to eyeball, to go to their conferences, to challenge their status quo, to expose the truth that is being conveniently hidden, the inconvenient truth, and basically change the paradigm by confronting them with a very solid base. So that's what I've taken from my experience at the Climate Engineering Conference. But also, one of the things I learned at the Climate Engineering Conference is they're interested in human engineering as well. Transhumanism is actually linked to geoengineering. It was mentioned on a number of occasions. And basically, this is these scientists, or the establishment behind the scientists, because the scientists are just tools in this agenda, but they want to control absolutely everything, from the tiniest particle to the far reaches of outer space. They want to control absolutely everything, and that will include nanotechnology in our food, in our bodies, and emerging sciences, and that makes me realise how important it is to continue and to push forward and to share that knowledge with these climate scientists and all the other different transdisciplinary academics that are involved, so that they become aware of the bigger picture. And that's where I feel that we're really effective, because these people, if we can demonstrate to them that we've been doing the research and we can share the information that's verifiable, if they're compartmentalised, if they're sitting on the fence, if they're not quite sure of the bigger picture and they really are just focused on what they're doing, we have the opportunity to broaden their horizons and to hopefully see them wake up and to see them begin to question what they're involved in and possibly question the establishment, and create a turning point for them. Because that's what we need. We need people from the establishment waking up and realising Agenda 21 is not the plan to save the planet like they're being sold. It's actually a plan to enslave the planet. And if I would imagine that most of them don't really want a system with nanotechnology inside their children, so that they will be monitored 24/7, 365 days a year. This is what the goal is: to have a completely tightly monitored society of the future. And it's just awful. And I think that we can get through to these people because I don't think they're aware of the bigger picture. And I think that's where our efforts will have to go in the future.
I think that's great, Max. I'm really, really impressed with what you've done there, and I've seen you in action at these conferences, these events, and you always put things across very rationally. They find it very difficult to argue with you, and of course it's usually like, well, we haven't got time for that tonight, but maybe we'll bring it up at the next meeting.
Yeah, we'll let other people we'll have a question now.
That's right, yeah. We'll go around to the plants in the audience, if you don't mind. Yeah. That's great, Max. So thanks a lot, and we'll speak to you very soon on Windows on the World.
Okay, thanks for having me, and take care. Keep doing the research.
That's right. Cheers. Thanks for joining us on Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World. We'll see you soon.